Hello, I'm Anita Hollinshead and I'm the Regional Collections Advisor for Museum Development East Midlands. And in this short film, I'm going to give you an introduction to cleaning collections. Just to sort of start by saying how I've prepared to do some cleaning. I've taken my rings off and my watch. I'm not wearing any jewellery, anything that might scratch collections that I'm touching. I've washed my hands and I'm not wearing hand cream because that can leave a greasy residue, and I haven't used hand sanitizer. So this is something that's become very familiar to us in the last year with COVID-19, but alcohol-based hand sanitizer on your hands will leave a residue on collections if you touch them. There's been some quite interesting research about this. Water-based hand sanitizers are not so harmful, but they're not as effective against COVID. So no hand sanitizer, no hand cream, just wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap and water to prepare for cleaning. So now I'm going to talk about gloves. These are white cotton gloves which were traditionally worn by curators working in museums. But these aren't really the best solution these days, because what we're trying to do is prevent the sweat and the acids in our skin from being transferred from our skin onto objects. We're also trying to prevent any hazardous materials and dirt and mould that are present on the surface of our objects being transmitted onto our skin. So permeable gloves are not really the best option. Better to use a pair of nitrile gloves. Now these need to be the right size, so they need to fit closely. So make sure they come in sizes from small to extra large. So make sure they're a good fit so that you can easily handle things and that the gloves don't get in the way. These are impermeable, so they protect our hands and they protect the objects. So we avoid wearing latex gloves because the powder coating on the inside of latex gloves can easily be transferred onto the surface of objects. And also that latex contains sulfur, and sulfur damages silver. So we don't want to handle silver objects with latex gloves. And we don't want to handle photographs with latex gloves because one of the primary components of photographs is silver. And finally, we've got these rigger gloves. So as you can see, these are quite bulky. They have this very textured coating on the inside. You wouldn't wear these when you're handling collections, but they are very helpful for picking up heavy boxes and moving them. It gives you greater properties of being able to grip things. And then in terms of our other sort of protective equipment, the other item of protective equipment that you might want to use are a pair of goggles. So if you're using chemicals or if you're cleaning things like mould, it's a good idea to protect your eyes with a pair of goggles. Also, if you're cutting with a scalpel, always advisable in case the blade snaps. Also, if you are removing mould, it's very advisable to wear a dust mask with an FFP3 filter, which filters out fine particles of dust for your own safety. I'm going to talk a bit more about that in one of the other films when we talk about hazards. Something else that you might find useful is this illuminated magnifying glass. It's very useful when you're looking at the condition of objects and when you're cleaning, just to see the progress that you're making. So moving around the table to look at other cleaning equipment that I've got here. We'll start with looking at the museum vac. This is an absolutely essential piece of equipment for collections cleaning. It comes with a whole range of attachments with little brushes and nozzles and so on. But a lot of the cleaning that we do will actually be about dusting the surface, removing loose dust and dirt from the surface of objects with a brush and flicking it into the nozzle of the hoover so that we're not redistributing it. Before we look at the other materials and equipment on the table, just a quick word about the principles around cleaning collections. What we're trying to do is the absolute minimum intervention. We're not trying to polish things and make them look brand new. We're not trying to remove dirt that might be part of the history of the object. What we're doing is removing loose dust and dirt that might cause damage in the future and to improve the appearance of objects before we put them on display. Dust is composed of dried skin, old insect cases, animal hair, atmospheric pollutants, carpet fibres, all sorts of things like that. So actually, when you see dust on the surface of objects, it can be quite damaging, it can be quite acidic. Also, if the surface of your object is a bit sticky because it's got varnish or wax on it, that dust can become embedded in the surface and can cause further damage. We also need to be really careful that when we're removing dust, we don't scratch the surface of the object. So we'll start by looking at brushes, and when we're using a brush to remove dust from the surface of objects, what we're going to do is flick the dust from the surface of the object into the nozzle of our museum vac. So we're not redistributing that dust and dirt around the area that we're working in. So we've got a selection of brushes. In terms of our cleaning kit, a good selection of brushes is a really important place to start. So I've got a goat's hair brush and a pony hair brush. These are both very soft. And I've also got a hog's hair brush. Now that's a little bit harder. Always start with the softest brushes first, that principle of always using the most gentle approach initially. If you need to do some really fine cleaning, you might actually need to use, like a very fine paintbrush like this for dusting in very intricate and fine areas. What you don't want to use are feather dusters, because the feathers can break off and then you've got something that will scratch the surface of objects. So always use brushes like these. What you also might want to do is to put a piece of masking tape around the ferrule here so that this can't scratch an object while you're cleaning, so around here. And also you'll want to wash your brushes when they get dirty. So to do that, you can use some conservation grade detergent or washing up liquid like this Surcare or Ecover washing up liquid, tiny amount. Give your brush a good wash and then give it a good rinse and dry it naturally. Give it a bit of a shake and then dry it naturally. So as your brushes get dirty, definitely want to be cleaning them. We've also got, this is called a banister brush, and this is very good for dusting large sort of flat surfaces. Moving on to other dry cleaning methods, we've got what we call smoke sponges. So these are made from vulcanized rubber, and you buy them as a big sort of brick like this, a vulcanized rubber. But what you do is cut them into these small pieces, and I'm going to demonstrate using these in a little while, but you very gently pick up dust and dirt off the surface of a range of different materials. These were originally designed as smoke sponges to remove soot after objects had been damaged in fires. Not in a museum context, but we've actually found, conservators have found that they're very useful for using on a range of objects in museums as well. We've also got some simple cosmetic sponges. These are just the ones that you can get from your high street chemist, and what you do is you cut them in half, to tear them in half, so you've got this textured surface. These are also inert and suitable for use with collections. They're particularly good for using with natural history with feathers, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a little while. I've also got a couple of pairs of tweezers. Sometimes when you've got very fine sort of hairs or threads from cloth embedded in, say, in a piece of wood, just use your tweezers to gently remove them. So another important thing to have in your cleaning kit. The other thing that we might have in our dry cleaning is using a cloth for removing dust. You don't want to use a yellow duster. That will leave fibres on the surface of your object. We've got a glass cloth here, which is very smooth, which you can use for removing dust and dirt. And we've also got, what this is unbleached jersey. You can use unbleached t-shirts, give them a good wash first and make sure that you've removed any detergent. Just give them a good wash and a rinse at 60 degrees centigrade. Or this is exactly that same fabric, unbleached cotton jersey, which you can use to make cleaning cloths. When you're cleaning an object, you need to be very careful that you're only removing dirt and dust and that you're not removing the surface of the object. particularly if there's ink or pigment present. So be constantly just checking your cloth or your brush, your object, use your magnifying glass, and just check that you're not taking anything off apart from that loose dust and dirt. We always start with that most gentle method of cleaning. So we've talked about those sort of dry cleaning methods, brushing dust and dirt into the nozzle of the hoover, using smoke sponges or cosmetic sponges, or lint-free cloths like those jersey cloths. Sometimes you might need to use wet cleaning with swabs. Always start with the gentlest solvent, which is water, and this is deionized water, so all the impurities have been removed from this. You can get deionized water from a supermarket or somewhere like Whole Foods. The other thing we've got is a conservation grade detergent. So Surcare washing up liquid, which is available in a normal supermarket, or something like Ecover washing up liquid would be okay. Use the tiniest drop of it. Whenever you clean with a tiny bit of detergent, always rinse afterwards with deionized water. And we'll be doing that using swabs. I'll be demonstrating that later. If we are going to use wet cleaning methods, we would use a swab and dip it into our deionized water or our solvent and gently roll it across the surface of the object. Now, we don't use the sort of cotton buds that you can buy from the chemists, which have got a plastic stalk in them, because the end of that plastic stalk can scratch the surface of objects. Also, if you dip it in some solvents like acetone, it will actually dissolve. So we make our own. And in order to do this, we need cocktail sticks or bamboo skewers if you need to make a bigger swab, and some standard cotton wool. So we just get our cotton wool and our cocktail stick, and we roll the cotton wool around there, make a nice tight swab. You don't want it to fall off the end of the cocktail stick when you're actually cleaning, so it needs to be well attached. So don't put too much cotton wool on there. And then as soon as your swab becomes dirty, you want to remove that bit of dirty cotton wool off the end. And in order to do that, we have a swab jar. So this is a standard jam jar. I've put a hole in the top there, top of the lid. And once the tip of your swab becomes dirty, you just take it off with that rough edge there, and you've trapped that dirty swab inside the jar. And if you have been using chemicals that are a bit smelly, you sort of trap the fumes in that jar as well. And then you just carry on and you make another tip for your swab and carry on cleaning. So as soon as it's dirty, change the top of it. So now I'm going to talk about the museum vac. This is a really crucial piece of equipment for dry cleaning. It has disposable bags and a HEPA filter, so it will trap things like mould spores safely in that bag, and you can seal it up and dispose of it. It also has a range of accessories, so I'm not going to wear it for this demonstration, but we do have this shoulder strap so that you can carry it on your shoulder and keep it out of the way of the collections that you're cleaning. That's particularly helpful if you're standing up to do the cleaning. Also has a range of little nozzles and brushes and fixtures that you can buy for it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the nozzle. As you can see, we've got a pop sock over the end of the nozzle, and that's held in place with a couple of elastic bands. You could also use a piece of muslin, a piece of fine muslin, to do that. And the reason that we do this is that when we're flicking dust from an object with a soft brush into the nozzle of the hoover, we just want to be sure that we don't accidentally remove something that is part of the object and that gets sucked into the hoover and we lose it. So that's why we do that before we start. Now I just want to talk to you about the suction as well. You want to use the lowest suction of your museum vac. So again, you're not causing too much stress on the surface of the object. If you're cleaning a textile, you don't want to see the surface of it lifting. So you want to keep it very low. So if I just switch this museum vac on, you'll hear it's at quite a high suction. And I'm turning it right down, and I'm just checking, and that's a very, very low suction that we've got there, which is going to cause minimum stress to the surface of our objects. Finally, what I've got here is an iron cloth. If you're going to be hoovering textiles and you're concerned about removing parts of the surface of the textile, or you want to protect it before you hoover it, use something like this ironing cloth or some loose mesh just to protect the surface before you vacuum it. So this is just a standard Brabantia iron cloth. So here we've got a wooden ladle or piggin, a dairy ladle. I'm just going to use that to demonstrate how we would remove loose dust with a soft brush. Got my goat hair brush here and the museum vac. We'd start at the top of the object and work our way down so that we're not flicking dust back up again onto the surface once it's been removed. So always start and work from the top down when you're dusting objects. So I'm just going to switch the museum vac on. We've got it on quite a low suction, and we're just going to use a brush like this to flick dust off the surface of the object into the nozzle of the hoover. So that's the method that we would use, working our way down into the hoover to remove that loose dust and dirt. And we'd work our way all the way down to the bottom. And when we go inside and remove the dust, same technique, so just gently flicking the dust up into the hoover. So now I'm going to use the museum vac to clean this small textile. I've taken my gloves off because we're handling textiles and I've got clean, dry hands. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the nozzle and just glide very gently over the surface of the rug, just doing a small area at a time, following the direction of the warp or the weft. And if there are some sort of hairs that are stuck in the surface of the rug, I've got my little tweezers here, and I can just lift them out with the tweezers very carefully off the surface. Or if there are other bits that I need a bit of extra help with, I can just flick the dust up again with the brush into the nozzle of the hoover. So it's using that same technique as before, of just flicking that dust back up into the nozzle, or just very gently gliding close to the surface, picking the dirt off there. Now you don't want to actually touch the surface of the textile with the nozzle of the hoover because you might damage it. Or the other approach you might want to take is that you might want to put a piece of mesh over that textile, this ironing mesh, and then you don't need to have the pop sock or the mesh over the end of your nozzle. And again, just working gently across the top of that in small areas to lift the dust and dirt off the surface. As with all cleaning processes, take your time. There's no need to rush, and these activities, they do take a lot longer than maybe just cleaning something at home. You need to do it very slowly and carefully, and be constantly checking that you are not removing part of the surface of the object or any original material. So now we're going to clean this small blackbird specimen. Now, before we start cleaning taxidermy specimen, we need to be confident that it doesn't contain arsenic or mercury. Arsenic soap was used particularly widely until the 1920s, and in some cases until the 1960s, to preserve taxidermy specimens against insect pest attack. Now, this little bird, we know that this is part of an education collection and is quite a modern mounted specimen, so arsenic isn't present. But it's something to always be mindful when dealing with natural history. So what we're going to do is we're just going to gently remove some dust from the feathers on this bird. And in order to do that, what we've got are our cosmetic sponges. So these are just the standard cosmetic sponges that you can get from the chemists. They're inert and they're safe to use with collections. When you get them, they look like this, And what I've done is I've just torn one in half, so we get this slightly rough surface, which is just perfect for cleaning with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently gently clean the feathers with this little sponge, very, very gently. Just very gently lifting the dust and dirt off the feathers. And what this does, whilst it cleans the feathers and it lifts the dust and dirt off the surface, it also realigns them, and so it sort of settles everything back into alignment on your specimen. So it's a very sort of therapeutic, very soothing activity, just gently cleaning the feathers of your bird. Just to remember that always start at the top of the object and work your way down when you're cleaning. So start at the top of the head and work your way down through the body. So I'm now just going to show you how to remove dirt from the surface of paper objects. First of all, I want to show you this electricity meter card, and as you can see, it's actually inside a Melanex enclosure, so we can safely handle it without actually touching the surface of the object. You'll also notice that I'm not wearing gloves for this because it's much better in terms of the tactile properties of our hands to handle paper objects with clean, dry hands. I've taken this object out of the Melanex enclosure, so I'm very carefully holding it in my hands here. What's a really good idea is to have a piece of acid-free board and to actually put your paper object onto that piece of board when you're lifting and moving it. But we're doing another short film about safe handling of collections, and we'll explain that in more detail in that one. So if you've got loose dust and dirt on the surface of a paper object, you might want to very gently, using your brush, just brush that out from the centre of the object like that. So very, very gently with the brush, flicking the dust off. And you'll notice that I've got this on a sheet of acid-free tissue, and if that becomes dirty with dust, I'll just change it and put another sheet down. But what we're going to look at next is how we might remove that loose dirt and dust off the surface of a paper object using a smoke sponge. So we get our smoke sponges in a big block like this, and then we can cut them with a pair of scissors to size, to a smaller size that we can use. While we're lifting dust and dirt off the surface of an object with our smoke sponge, once it becomes dirty and we can see dirt on the surface, we can just turn around and use another surface. Once all the surfaces are dirty, then discard your smoke sponge and use a clean piece. Some people do actually wash them. That's something you might want to try and see if you feel that they are still as effective. What I'm going to show you is this electricity department meter code, and I'm just going to gently remove it from the polythene enclosure into my hand and onto the table like that. And what I want to particularly mention here is that there is some damage to this meter card. It's torn, as there is a little damage to this document here as well. There's also some staining, and there's ink and there's pencil writing here, if you can see that. So there's a number of things to think about. You know, the object's quite fragile and we don't want to damage it further, so we need to be very careful. We should only do the very minimal amount of cleaning that's necessary. And we need to be very careful that any cleaning we do, whether it's the pencil or the ink, we're not actually lifting those off the surface. So we take our little piece of smoke sponge and we just very gently, using this approach, just very gently over a very small area, just lift the dirt off there. And all the time we just keep checking the surface of the sponge, make sure we haven't lifted any of that ink off the surface. So just very lightly. And then when that surface gets dirty, turn it round and we use another surface like that to very, very gently lift that dirt off the surface with the smoke sponge. keep checking. You can see some dirt on the surface of that sponge, so it's very effective. But we just need to be absolutely confident that all we're removing is dirt and not an intrinsic part of the object. So I'm just going to summarise the key things to consider when cleaning objects. I think one of the first things you need to think about is that it will take time. To give yourself time, you need time and you need patience. You can't rush the procedures, and you need to be very careful that you don't remove anything other than loose dust and dirt. You don't remove any parts of the object. If you do accidentally break something or remove it, then put it in a small bag or box, carefully labelled, and keep it with the object, because it can usually be restored by a conservator in the future. Make sure that you check the condition of your object very carefully before you start. Before you handle it, just have a look. Has it got tears like this meter card? This little bird, some of the feathers are quite loose, so some overzealous cleaning, you could find yourself removing them. So have a look for areas of weakness. Are there chips in a ceramic? Is the glaze damaged? Are textiles torn? And just to remember that it's always the most minimal intervention is the best approach. So often all you need is very light and careful brushing of loose dust and dirt into the nozzle of your hoover, and that's probably all that you need to do. So we're just going to have a look at some swab cleaning now. So what I've got some deionised water. That's water with all the impurities removed that you can get from a garage or a supermarket. I've got some very gentle detergent, so this is Surcare washing up liquid. You could use Ecover washing up liquid or a conservation grade detergent from a museum suppliers. I've got my cotton wool and cocktail sticks to make swabs with. I've got a couple of magnifying glasses so I can look more closely at what I'm doing. I'm wearing my nitrile gloves. I've got my swab jar to get rid of the dirty ends of the swabs as they come along. And then I've also got a blower like we would use for cleaning a camera lens, but it's also very useful for blowing dust out of sort of crevices and cracks and in areas of objects. We've also got a couple of little pots here to put my detergent and water in. So the object that we're going to look at is this sauce bottle. It's got some residual sauce on the inside that we're not going to touch. We would say that was dirt that was part of the object, part of the history of the object. We never want to over clean things, so we are just removing a little bit of surface dirt. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this tie-on label, which has got the accession number of the bottle on it, and I'm going to put that out of the way here. I'm going to take my deionised water and pour it into one of these little ramekins. And I'm also going to pour a bit more into this one. Because in this one I'm going to put the tiniest drop of detergent, the tiniest drop of detergent, and that's what we're going to start with. So first of all, you can use your blower and you can just gently blow down these areas to check as a way of blowing out loose dust. You might want to use a technique of a brush and a museum vac, but it's always a good idea to have one of these in your cleaning kit as well. They're particularly good for sort of dusty geological specimens, that kind of thing, sculpture. So now I'm going to make the swab. I'm going to just wrap the cotton wool around the end of the cocktail stick. You could also use a bamboo skewer for this, putting it on quite tightly and without too much cotton wool, and I'm just going to dip it in the pot. Now you don't want your swab to be dripping, you just want it to be a little bit damp, and then what we're going to do is just roll it over the surface of the object, and as you roll it you'll see that it's picking up dirt on the surface of the swab. And once that swab is dirty, all you do is you get rid of the end of it in your swab pot, and then you just make a new clean swab and start on the next bit. we go, squeezing out the water so it's not too wet, and just rolling that up and down on the surface to clean it. Now when you've done that with your water with detergent in it, we're then going to rinse it. So that's why we've got this water, which is just deionised water without any detergent in it. And what you'd do, you'd finish cleaning the whole of your object, make another swab, and just lightly clean it again like that. So you've rinsed off any residual detergent. Yes. And you'd go around your whole of your object doing that, using the detergent, lifting off surface dirt, and then going over with plain deionised water to rinse off any residual detergent. Do keep checking your swabs, and if you feel like you're taking any of the surface of the object off, if you're removing pigments or dirt that is actually really more of the history of the object, then stop at that point. Never over clean. You're not trying to make this look brand new, you're just removing surface dirt. And finally, just a reminder that you always keep a record of any cleaning that you've done on an object, record the materials that you've used, and keep that with your basic documentation so that you've always got that to refer to in the future. Thank you.